Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Screaming Down the Poetic Highway. Episode number, who knows? Do you guys care? No, doesn't matter. I'm your host, Ken Tomorrow, Poet Laureate of the Cleveland Sewer System. It's been a while. Laziness, depression, all that good stuff. I have no excuses, but I need to keep doing these things. So in my defiant kind of fuck the man, or at least fuck the writing man attitude, I'm going to give you some more free poetry, another chapbook this time around. I'm going to try to make it quick. I know after about 15-20 minutes, your attention spans probably go down the shitter, so I'll run through these pretty quick. This one is April is generally Poetry Month, and as such, there are several like Facebook groups or whatever who do the challenge to try to write a poem a day for 30 days. It's not as easy as it sounds. My poetry comes organically, so sometimes I come up with 5 in a day, sometimes I get nothing in a week. I managed to come up with about 42 or 43 of these, but that's where we're at. So I am going to just, but for me to do this thing, the 30 poems in 30 days, I gave myself a couple rules for no reason whatsoever. 2 of them. One of them is that all these poems are going to be in third person, which I guess maybe just because it's easier for me to write third person poems, and they all have to be finished. Brain fart, I can't remember what the word is. The challenge for the 30 days is that they did not have to be finished poems. You just wanted to have a base of, something to work with. But for me, my brain doesn't work like that, so they have to be finished. Same thing as all the other videos. I have no titles. I'll go back later and do that. So I'm just going to run through these. The chapbook itself is titled "The Goose That Laid a Golden Turd Every Day for 30 Days and Then Some." He didn't think it was fair to push himself to the uncomfortable point of laying 30 golden eggs in as many days. But with all the other chickens in the yard staring in anticipation, he felt like he had no other choice but to flap his wings for show. He stood at the window looking down at the river. The machines were digging up a section of pavement down in the flats. There was an old factory that should have been flattened at least 20 years ago. It was a place that was most likely frequented by people who liked to stick needles in their arms. Something new was being built, and when it was finished, would be a glistening new turd in the same old broken toilet. On the other side of the river, the side with money, a new apartment complex was being born, its head crowning from the birth canal as we speak. At $3,000 a month, it boasted of a rooftop swimming pool. At that price, he didn't see it being worth it to be able to dip one's toes in the water for 3 good months, called summer in the Midwest. To him, wet toes only brought with them a fungus that was almost impossible to get rid of. He found that you have to sift through a tremendous amount of bullshit to get to the little bits of good in life, and all that work was very tiring. And speaking of dipping his toes, it had been 6 long months and would still be a couple more before he could. After staring endlessly at the technology in a cold, angry world, he wanted desperately to stand among the green of nature, swirling a toe or two in the warm water of a wooded pond. And if I didn't tell you before, obviously I don't sit and practice all these poems, so if my reading sucks, I absolutely am aware of that. So something was not right on the horizon of downtown Cleveland. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he was seeing things. Last he checked, there were no mountains he knew of in Cleveland, Ohio. But there it was along the horizon, an outcropping, the faint outline of a murky day of a mountain, Gildersleeve Mountain, It was actually in the city of Kirtland, but as far as his eyes were concerned, everything he could see from his office window was part of Cleveland. Although not written in stone, he felt it best to stay away from rolled up foods. He could not figure out on what fucking planet he felt it acceptable for his bank to cold call him in regard to their provided services, or to ask if there was anything else they could do for him, the only thing being the obvious of not losing his money. He noticed how the naked treetops reminded him of the bristles of a beard, and after another long winter, it was time for the trees to go wild. The funeral came and went. People cried and brought casseroles, and the funeral was followed by another, and eventually the lineage was broken, as he had no kids of his own to carry on the name. But that didn't stop other things from happening in the world. He thought it crazy that anyone would willingly sit on a small plank of wood back to the rising sun, suspended 30-some stories above the concrete, to wash windows. In some respects, his job was much more dangerous, sitting in a cubicle, staring at emails with the stale office air slowly rotting away at his brain. One day they will find his decaying body in a pile under the desk, smile on his face, because for once, someone else was going to have to clean up a mess around here. People looked at him funny when he told them that he could feel the change in weather in his gut. He never quite understood this because old people always talked of feeling it in their bones. It was his body, and he knew what he knew, and he knew when the weather changed. His insides felt like a balloon just at its breaking point. He didn't tell people that since they already looked at him like he was crazy. This one has a title. The only one in the bunch, I think. Another thing he couldn't wrap his head around was the title. Why people stared at him as he walked down the street. He checked everything beforehand. His zipper was zipped up. There was no mustard stains on his shirt, boogers in his nose, or spinach in his teeth. He couldn't even tell you the last time he ate spinach, yet one by one their eyes locked on his as they passed. All he wanted to do was buy a can of ground coffee and some butter without hassle. He couldn't find much enjoyment in watching a movie on TV anymore. They had become too much, too over the top. There was a suspension of disbelief that superheroes existed at all, and that they were followed by large, fiery explosions. But then he remembered for a moment all the Clint Eastwood movies and Charles Bronson movies of the past where they carried guns as big as their forearms, guns that could blow a hole in the wall the size of a door, bullets flying all around while driving their police car through the front wall of a bank full of hostages, and miraculously no one took a hit. He wrote, "You are here," on the little sheets of paper and taped them around the apartment. It would mean little, if anything, to someone on the outside. To him, it meant he was still here and could afford a place where he could post little notes on the walls. Sometimes he thought it would be nice to have a she in his life, but he realized there was a certain amount of work, or what he referred to as chaos, in having someone else around. And sometimes he thought it would be easier to run his face over a cheese grater. It might certainly be less painful. It was the last Sunday of March, early morning. The sun was burning a red line along the horizon. It was still cool enough to need a jacket, and there was still frost on his windshield. He looked toward the sun and smiled. This particular side street had been in decay for some time. One of the high-rise buildings was being renovated, and the street attached had become what looked like a communal toilet. As he walked past another sketchy alley, he was for once met with a pleasant odor, one from childhood. This had happened many times, but the aroma was both specific and obscure. Was it a candy he once ate, or maybe something less tangible, like a place or time? Was it before or after his mother's passing? most definitely before, and something that cost less than 75 cents. He held tightly to these memories, calling it a brioche, as it sat in his mind, light-hearted, almost effervescent. Standing in front of the cereal aisle at the grocery store, he suddenly realized he was way over his head. It was like standing on the strip in Las Vegas watching all the flashing lights, only none of this was appealing to him. The birds, he noticed, were much louder in the onset of spring. They had a lot to say after surviving another frozen winter, but mostly they spoke of how tired they were of the cold weather and how they couldn't wait for it to finally warm up. I just brushed my teeth, he thought. How could it be that time again already? And that was his life in a nutshell. A series of mild inconveniences that happened between each toothbrushing. The movie was called The Blind Swordsman. Traveling the land, a blind man found himself unknowingly in a war-ravaged area controlled by two rival gangs. It was a Japanese film, and there were no subtitles. He watched it anyway, both men wandering a strange land and fighting an unseen foe. The blind man never missing his mark, while the non-blind man swung carelessly at the enemy that was all in his head. One man wins, but at what cost, while the other man loses, and it costs him everything. His days of writing poems about cats were behind him, so he thought. That was until a fellow poet wrote 3 short cat poems, like rapid gunfire, and those poems ignited some sort of spark in the brain of a man somewhere in the suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. As long as there were cats in this world, there were poems to be written about them, and trees, and the birds, and the moon, and this cat, Junior by name, was still alive, just rehomed. Our suburban man could never live with the guilt if his sister tripped over Junior with her walker, and it was only a matter of time. He had been in the apartment by himself for a while now, and more than once thought about getting another non-human companion. That was until he remembered how often non-human companions randomly throw up on the carpet. As we die and decay, like the leaves of a tree, our bodies become nutrients, food for Mother Earth, nurturing new growth. As I die, little bits each day, there are things I can't imagine, thinking about being born in this very minute. I'm not really sure that's third person, so I may have fucked that up. He felt it was important to take a moment to thank the universe for even the smallest of things, and would regularly scold himself for the times he had forgotten to. No, the universe wasn't in charge of his every step, but it was nice, he thought to himself, that someone, or in this case, something, was keeping an eye on him. He imagined, more often than he probably should have, about hopping a freight train like a grizzled old drifter, sitting in a dusty boxcar eating beans from a can, cannellini being his favorite. Outside of having a smooth, buttery taste, they were the only beans worth eating cold. He imagined jumping off somewhere in the bayou of Louisiana, somewhere warm and tree-lined, somewhere inhabited by turtles, egrets, river otters. Even a snake or alligator would be okay, so long as there were no humans, so long as there was green in every direction, so long as he knew his direction and didn't up in some barren flat plot in Idaho. He mailed out 50 handwritten poems to 50 random people in all 50 states. There was no reasoning behind this other than he thought a country full of strangers might need a poem to get through the day, but he didn't know for sure. He didn't know why the one from Hawaii was refused and returned, but he did know you don't always get the results you want. This was part of a learning process, learning to let go. True story, I actually did that. I suppose more people than will ever know wonder what really is the point of it all. What is our purpose? And he too fell into that group. He sometimes wondered, often wondered if he was supposed to be another one of those people who ended their day punching a clock and home became the bar down the street. There is a term in the medical world used to describe things that are healthy and normal, and that term is unremarkable. If your heart beats at exactly the number of beats per minute that it is supposed to, it is the correct pinkish hue, the right size and shape, nothing out of the ordinary, then it is said to be unremarkable. No one but himself can be sure of his heart, but by all accounts, everything about his life was truly unremarkable. It was a chilly morning in March. Winter did not want to leave. There were a lot of grays and dull blues hanging in the sky. He wasn't in a good mood or a bad mood, but the way the sun was shimmering off the wet pavement of the downtown streets, it gave him a sense of peace that it was okay to feel neither this nor that. And the grays and dull blues stretched further across the sky. The sun was also dull, but still trying. He stared out the window at the abstract painting of the skyline like he did so often as a child after a good rain. Only now he had responsibilities. The weight of that word sat long and heavy on his shoulders. His head tilted downward from a hollow weight. But he, like the sun, doesn't give in, and both continue to try. What might the void be like? He wanted to experience the absence of everything. Sound, mental images sprouting from the base of his skull, the absence of color, even white. To deprive his senses, all 56,000 of them. What could that possibly be like? Would it drive him to insanity or euphoria? He simply wanted the experience, if only for a few seconds. When he was younger, in his 20s, even into his 30s, he thought if he wasn't out in the world sitting on a bar stool, he was missing everything. How wrong he was, and appreciated the fact that this wasn't a necessity in life. The smell of smoke and old wood, talkative drunks tripping over their own tongues, sports and fucking sports on the TV, the hangover, the empty wallet, empty soul. He'll be the first to tell you the drink will put you in another world, but sometimes it's not a world worth being in. There's not much to life until you realize there's more to life than a wobbly bar stool. Oh, this is a long one. This was from the Eclipse. The path of totality, total darkness. To some, a sign the gods were angry with humans and the sun would abandon the earth, plunging everything into eternal darkness. Billed as a once-in-a-lifetime event, a solar eclipse, although somewhat rare, happens more than once in a lifetime, and he was one of those who would witness such darkness. He was, except for the cockroaches hiding in the walls, the only living soul in his Cleveland, Ohio office today. Part of him couldn't understand all the rage. People filled the hotels and the streets. They were scattered across the rooftops. Would the weather hold out? The meteorologist had everyone hanging by a proverbial thread. For weeks, the news channels reminded the human race, the ones responsible for nuclear fusion, computer chips the size of a fingernail, rockets traveling millions of miles to another planet, not to stare directly at a giant fireball that was 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet, some would still go blind. He understood very little of the science and nature, but still knew a few things. Every human in the path would snap 1,000 pictures and have everyone thinking or believing it was an original Alex Prager. Every poet would liken it to the birth of gods, or more abstractly, the meaning of love. But he still didn't understand the rage. He knew it was, in fact, a big deal. Science and nature, hand in hand, intertwined to present them, the human race, something most people would never comprehend. But to him it was just another moment of darkness, a darkness that molded him every day for a half-century. He remained steadily in the path of totality since his lungs took their first gasp of air. And when it finally did happen, at 3:13 p.m., his little part of the world went black. People cheered, fireworks went off in the distance, and he felt a great unexplainable sadness when it was over. He felt dress clothes were for funerals. When a work function came up last minute, his mind went into a tailspin. $60 shoes, $35 khakis, and a button-up shirt from Goodwill. The Holy Trinity, trifecta, hat trick. Call it what you will. He's the dog in those videos wearing booties tripping over itself with a look of terror on his face. Staring out the break room window at work, a surreal question popped into his already muddled mind. Did the steel mill ever get tired from running 24 hours a day? Or what about trains? Did they get tired from pulling a half mile's worth of cars? Did the cicadas, when they were about to make their appearance after 17 years of sleep, Jesus Christ, I plucked that one. Never mind. It was an empty feeling, his existence. There was nothing, no joy, no energy, no looking forward to the future, no looking forward to anything. The simplest task, whether the sun was shining or whether someone smiled or whether a new experience brought him nothing. This is what it's like to feel empty. You are nothing but skin wrapped around bone, walking autonomously in a whitewashed world. Whether you have 200 or 2 million pain receptors, you feel nothing but numb, which isn't a feeling at all. If you stare long enough at the wall, eventually time will pass. It will be tomorrow, and hopefully, like time, the numbness will also pass, when in reality it will simply fester into anger. His was a Charlie Brown life, a dark cloud of squiggly black lines above his head at all times, so he didn't see a need to buy cardboard glasses to stare into the shielded sun directly into more darkness. Having now finally been to Pittsburgh, it's a beautiful place, by the way, he saw what might have been their life together, and it was equally as beautiful. Two young idiots, himself for sure, navigating the winding streets of P-Town, just as confusing as their young, stupid lives. For once in his gray-haired life, he was on somewhat solid financial ground. He no longer beat himself up for a simple purchase of socks. He was by no means rich, but no longer had to give serious thought to every penny being tossed out the door. He did, however, still struggle with the idea of spending $800 for a couch, an item whose sole purpose was so you could sit and do absolutely nothing. He could do that anytime he wanted for free. That's it. That's all of them. Sorry I fucked up a couple of them, but it's free. What are you going to do? So, see you next time.